Okay, so I'm going to talk about incident investigations. I'm going to talk about some of my time when I was in private industry, not in the department. And I'm going to talk about my personal experiences and observations around adverse events and significant incidents and investigations. I'm going to use a human factors lens to actually, when I talk about these events, and I'm going to use the human factors guide, the fundamental guide, to help me examine these events in more detail. I'm also going to use let's try this trigger. I'm also going to use the principles, the 5 principles of human performance. And after each story, and I got 3 stories to tell, after each story, I'll see if one or more of those principles can be applied. So first of all, I'd like to share a quotation from Trevor Klutz, who is the designer of the inherent safety concept for process safety. And his comment, his quotation, which I think is very relevant, is that for a long time, most people were saying that most accidents were as a result of human error. And that's true in a sense, but it's not very helpful. It's a bit like saying falls are due to gravity. So I'd like to talk about a strange event that happened at a processing plant. And after the strange event, I was called in as the lead investigator. So I sat down with the maintenance crew and I spoke to them about what actually occurred. And this is what they told me. They told me it was the first job of the night. It was planned work. It was priority work. They would be removing several valves and clearing blockages in piping. The teams understood the work, what needed to be done. They went to the workplace, they had a look at the area, they saw that the housekeeping was good, the lighting was good. They spoke to production, everything was isolated, it was tagged, it was drained, it was locked out, work packs were ready, so it was all good and ready to go. They said it was, as I said, it was night shift, the mood was good among the crew, it was warm night, it was a bit of a light breeze, and they were ready to get stuck in, and that's what they did. So the maintenance team broke up into 3 crews. So the first crew worked on the first level of the building, another crew on the second level of the building, and the third crew were actually on the 3rd level of the process building. So they got to work, and they were working on vertical pipelines which had pipes and valves coming off that line and other lines as well. So there's a whole range of work they were actually doing. And during that process, they were clearing and undoing blockages. So I sat down and I spoke to the crew who were on the 3rd level, and I asked them, how did they go about their job? And the maintainers told me, look, they were using pneumatic tools, rattle guns, to actually undo the bolts, and everything was going really well, and they were powering through the work. And I asked them what happened next. And the maintainer said, look, we were working on the vertical pipe, we were working on the bottom flange of the valve, and we were undoing that using a pneumatic tool. And we got to the last bolt. Then he stopped talking. So I said, okay, well, what happened? Can you remember what happened next? And he looked at me, and I knew that he was going to tell me the truth. And he looked at me and he said, it was like magic. The pipe just disappeared. And I said, well, what can you remember next? And he said, well, there was silence. And then we heard the pipe as it banged and clanged all the way through the building. And I said, what do you think actually happened? And he said, well, we went down to the 2nd level and we realized that the crew on the 2nd level had actually been also powering through their work. And they had removed all the attachments on the pipe, on the vertical pipe at the bottom. So when he started work on the top, never expecting that the work on the bottom had been completed, the pipe just let go. Once that last bolt was undone, off it went and hit the ground. No one was injured. The other crew fortunately were away. I will say that the people involved in it were suffering a little bit of shock and a bit of stress. So why was this a strange event in the processing plant? It was a strange event because these guys did not anticipate that this was going to happen. In their mind, their journey was clear. They were going to knock off all these valves, do all the work that they were required to do, and finish it, and it was going to be a great success. But that wasn't to be. So we are here today to talk about human factors and to apply our human factors guide and our principles of human performance. So let's have a consideration of what possible causal factors might be. So in your own minds, just think about some of the causal factors, and let's go through them and see if we can pick on the one that's more suitable. And of course, the one I thought was more suitable was, of course, and the day that's in it? Gravity. So gravity was the causal factor in this event. Gravity took the pipe and took complete control and lowered it to the ground in an uncontrolled, reckless manner. So how would you feel if you took that back to your general manager or your CEO this afternoon and said, look, the reason why the event happened was due to gravity? What do you think she might say to you? She may congratulate you on doing it. You're doing a great effort, you're doing a great job, but please go back and try again. So you might go back and you say, okay, what are the other causal factors it could be? It's not gravity. Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? It's either a technical failure or it's human error. Okay? Now I can see the engineers in this room, they're nodding already because they know what it is. It's a technical failure. Because if that pipe had been engineered properly, if the structure had been designed in such a manner, it would have never fallen. So it's a technical error. But I can see some engineers are not agreeing with that, and they're saying, look, that's absolute rubbish. Of course it's not engineering. It was human error. That pipe would have stayed where it was with that one bolt holding it until that other person came along and took that bolt off. So is it technical error or is it human error? Well, the question is wrong. It's misleading because it tends to make us think of it's either or. And the reality is it's actually somewhere in the middle. It's much more complex. We need to think of the context and the system conditions that influence our shape our performance. This brings me to the principle, the number one principle in our human performance guide. Variation in human performance is natural. It's normal. It's not causal. People make mistakes. So human performance should not be capable of leading to a major incident or a significant event on its own. We need to have barriers in place because we should anticipate that people are going to make mistakes. I'm going to talk about witness statements. So once a serious incident occurs in plants, the key things kick into place is around caring and checking on anybody who might be injured. It's all around making sure the area is safe, and it's around informing, notifying, and the investigation begins. And a key component of any investigation is a witness statement, and that's important because during the investigation, the attention will automatically turn to the people who had their hands last on the equipment. There could be the bystanders or the observers nearby, and of course the supervisor who allocated the task. And those people are often sought out to provide witness statements. But some organizations require personnel to provide handwritten witness statements, and that's okay, that's fine to do. However, sometimes when people are faced with a handwritten statement and they have to write it, some people do not have the same literacy skills or the comprehension skills or the writing skills to actually formulate a narrative in this witness statement. And they struggle with that. And also, they may also be suffering from trauma and a sense of crisis after the event. And that's going to cloud their thinking and judgment as they are trying to write this narrative. So some people might want to use a computer, and that may not be possible or even allowed. And as I mentioned, that sense of crisis comes from the fear and the fear of loss of job security. It's also a fear of loss of respect among their co-workers, because after all, they've caused a pretty bad event. And also that sense of crisis, there is also the fear of the corrective actions. And in Western Australia, there are what I call the 3 R's of corrective actions. There is retrain, reprimand, or redeployment. And again, even after a witness statement is taken and people have put down their thoughts and what they believe has happened, they may change their story later. And that's because their memory might be contaminated by another person who might say to them, look, this is what happened. This is how it's all came down. So the most important part of a witness statement, if it's handwritten, is it needs to be followed up immediately by a face-to-face interview. That interview then can gather all the information to actually help and give context behind the event. So that brings me to my next story. And there was an incident at the processing plant, which was unfortunate because if there hadn't been an incident, we probably would have been celebrating the work that had been done in a timely manner and so forth. But that wasn't to be. A different pathway has now opened up, and it was an investigation. So there was 2 contract workers, and they were at the sharp end of the event, and they were interviewed within 20 minutes of the event. So they provided a handwritten statement separately, and they were also interviewed, and they provided information. There was a formal investigation, went over 3 days, and on the 4th day, the 2 contract workers were flying out because it was a shift change. And I should mention at this time that early on in the investigation, it was mentioned to the 2 contract workers that they were probably going to be redeployed when they got back to the city. In the meantime, the lead investigator is reviewing all the evidence and data that's been generated over the coming days, over the previous days, and he noticed that the witness statements from the 2 contract workers is pretty light on. And he decides to get another person who has been uninvolved in the investigation and to send that person post-haste to the airport before these guys fly out, and to have a conversation with them to gather as much additional information as they can, and perhaps even get another handwritten statement. So how do you think the 2 contract workers felt when this gentleman rocks up at the airport and asks them for another witness statement? It was a feeling of humiliation and shame, no doubt. But in fairness to the 2 contract workers, they provided a lot of additional information before they flew out. And how much value do you think that information that they might have provided during that face-to-face interview at that time? So they're in the airport, they're providing this information. Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't, from a reasonable point of view, it wasn't very useful at all. I would call it slander, it was innuendo, it was gossip, it was self-serving. Because remember, they're flying out and they're over it. The investigation is finished. And the driver for going to get that additional witness statement or information may be driven from a compliance mindset. And that's not how we manage risk. That's not how we think about how we manage risk. And the additional effort, as I said, it didn't change anything. But what it did firmly do, what it firmly set in place, was this. It put blame. It put the people squarely. It was blame. So blame does nothing to explain why the behavior occurred, what influenced the actions or inactions, and it conceals real issues lying within the system. And of course, people need to be held accountable if they have done an act of gross negligence, or if they've been acting recklessly, or if there's a criminal activity. They must be held accountable. But I'd like to go back to the handwritten statement. If we go and ask for a handwritten statement, that's fine, but we must follow it up with a face-to-face interview that gathers as much, which has got a caring, open and inquiring, a sensitive manner to get as much information as possible directly after the event. Which brings me to the human performance principle number 2. Blaming human performance fixes nothing. Routinely attributing the cause of an incident to human behavior is overly simplistic. Even the most experienced personnel will make a mistake at some stage in their career. This brings me to my next story. Rapid investigation and closure. So after a serious event, there is often a need and a desire for recovery and production restart. And there's very good reasons for that. But there's also a balance of starting up operations too soon and maybe risking an occurrence of a similar event. However, if an employee or if a person was to stand up and say, hey, that was my fault, that was my action or inaction that caused this event, well, it does make things a lot more simple, doesn't it? You can actually wrap up the investigation pretty quickly, get some corrective actions going, and everything goes back to normal. So my third story is around a forklift traveling through the plant. And everything was going fine until the forklift ended up in a situation. It nearly overturned. Now, the machine operator was very embarrassed. He tried to extract the machine from the area, and it didn't work for him. So he went off and got help. He immediately took responsibility for it. The investigation was closed. It was sorted out. The forklift should never have been in that area. The person should never have been driving it there. It was done. However, the leadership got involved, and they asked me to come with them to look at this event. And when I got there, we looked at the forklift. And the leadership had 3 questions for me. The first one was, could this forklift have overturned? The second question was, could the person have been injured? And the third question was, how did this happen? So in relation to the first question, I said, look, I wasn't sure, but I didn't think it could overturn the way it was situated. The second question was, could a person be injured? Well, I said, look, if a machine turns over, there's a great chance they could be injured. Third question was, how did it happen? They know why it happened. Well, the reason why the machine was inside there was because somebody drove it in. But they wanted to know how it happened, because so much energy and so much resources had been placed into developing this workplace that they were a bit disappointed and a little bit shocked that maybe things aren't going the way they expected it. So how did it happen? Well, we had an opportunity to use to start. I won't even call it an investigation. It was a learning experience where the management were able to give us some additional resources, which was LIDAR technology, which is light detection and radar. We had drones, so we overflew the area. We took measurements of the forklift. We went back to the suppliers and worked out that yes, the machine couldn't have fallen over in that orientation. It did look incorrect where it was. We also learned that there was production priorities. There was a lot of things happening on the day. There was an accepted practice that if things were tough, you go and got the forklift and went in and took up the equipment. There was a road closure. This area had actually been plowed up previously. There was a lot of things. So the context was huge. So the reality is, when a person gets a job to do, they'll have maybe a work instruction, they'll have an activity to do, there'll be time constraints, may actually be some questions, but they've got to make it work. But sometimes it doesn't work out the way they expected it, and there's actually an incident. Then management get involved, leadership. There's an incident occurs. Management are there. They're surprised, shocked, maybe a little bit irritated. They may choose to use the gavel, or they might choose to use the sledgehammer. They've got to think about the people, and they've got to think about what the people were thinking during the incident. And you've got to have a sense of justice. Which brings me to the 4th human performance principle. Sorry, 4 and 5. So context drives behavior. So context is people's beliefs, their perceptions, motivations, which all shape their performance. And people perform in a way that makes perfect sense to them. And how leadership responds matters. Visible leadership commitment, modeling desired behaviors and attitudes is pivotal as workers take their cues from the management and the immediate work environment. A just, no blame culture encourages reporting and improvement. I'd now like to talk about error prevention and proactive learning. Who was hoping that helicopter would burst into flames? Doesn't happen here in WA. Anyway. So taking the time to study and learn from adverse events is incredibly useful. Also, it is a reactive learning process. It happens after the event, and the harm and damage may have already been done. So while it might be useful to put energy and resources into learning from adverse events, we must also be mindful of putting just as much effort into proactive opportunities to learn and to improve safety in the workplace. In the absence of adverse events, we need to have a keen focus on weak signals, things that may indicate that things are not quite right. We need to seek opportunities for error prevention, things where we can actually correct things. And we need to create a culture of proactive learning and constantly seeking improvement. Now, it is well understood that when industry go to the shop floor to engage with their workforce, that it's a very positive thing. They can help with problem solve, coach, encourage learning, and so forth. The value of visible leadership is well understood here in WA, in the resource industry. There are many fine programs out there where the leadership go into the workplace to engage with the workforce. There's safety leadership visits, there's leadership engagements, work contacts, critical risk management, and so on. And I've seen some great outcomes and initiatives flowing from these events. But when I look at these events, I often think about the training I've received, and that's around what they call the Gemba walk. And Gemba comes from lean manufacturing. And in it, it talks about the real value in the workplace is actually at the work front. And it's not in an office studying key performance indicators, not always anyway, I'll hasten to add. And there are 3 components to doing a Gemba walk. Go and see. Ask how and why. And respect people. And this is the philosophy I use when I go into the field and I do a leadership engagement with people. And there is another subset. And I'd like to talk through some of these and some of the things I have seen that have worked well and maybe not so well here in WA. Make time. So to have a leadership engagement program, you got to have a schedule and you got to adhere to that schedule. And I've been in many meetings where the leadership have banged the table and said, look, our leadership engagements or our work contacts are really down at the moment and they need to improve. And by the way, I didn't have a chance to do any this week, but that doesn't matter because you should be doing them. Okay, so visible leadership, displaying the right behaviors? No. All leaders are involved, and sometimes senior leaders or leaders, the refinery manager or so forth might decide, look, hey, I'll take the burden off my superintendents. I'll do the leadership engagements for this week. You don't have to do them. And again, while it's commendable on some occasions, it's not should never be the routine. It's got to be all the leaders are out there and getting involved. And every work front is important. So I've seen leaders who've driven into the car park, they've stepped out and there's a civil works occurring nearby on the plant and they might be repairing a portable water line. And the senior leader says, oh, beauty, I can do a work contact right now. And they do that on that civil works at the front entrance and then they go upstairs into their office. And that's okay because every work front is important. However, that civil works probably gets contacted about 15 different times by different people. So it's over-serviced by leadership engagements. And so the leadership engagements should be out in the plant. So while we can do one at the front, it's got to be across the plant. Ask how and why. Some key things is around listening to the people, gentle inquiry, not rushing to counter what people might tell you, and Focus as work as done and not as imagined. So the view should not be when you come to the workplace is to say, hey, this is how the work should happen. It should be, this is what's actually happening right now. It's that blue line that's been mentioned a few times in this meeting today. Don't try and catch people out. So if you're going to schedule a meeting, it's got to be, you need to let your workforce know. We're coming to visit. We'll be there this afternoon at some time. So they're prepared, because you want to catch them in success. And you also want the opportunity to spend some time and understand how they do their work and what can be improved. One superintendent at one meeting, he said, look, I did my scheduled leadership engagement. He said, but I found my people doing something which was really bad. And they were looking because I was doing a leadership engagement, because they said if I was doing a compliance check where I was walking around and found them doing what they were doing, there'd be an incident raised. And that's courage, that he can say, look, I'm going to step back and I'm going to trust my people, and I'm going to say, look, what you're doing is not right, but because we're in a learning situation, I'm not going to raise an incident. Avoid rushing to conclusions. Don't assume that all the things that you expect will be in place are there. And do not point and blame. And that's pretty important from this part around respecting people. There's been so many times that I've been in meetings where somebody says, look, what were these idiots thinking when I went to do the walk? This is what they were doing. And that's not the right way to treat people if it's a learning organization. So the key principle, and it's number 3, but it is certainly central to our whole concept of today. Learning is vital. Organizational learning, driven by leadership, commitment, and continuous improvement, or learning culture, is fundamental to our industry here in WA. So in summary, and it didn't crash into that, yeah. We're on a winner. Every day at a location, people make mistakes. So right now at your location, people are making mistakes. What we must always remember, that human performance alone should not contribute to a major event or series in any system. If a person makes a mistake at a location, then the maximum safety consequence should never be death or serious injury. We need to have barriers in place to prevent that from occurring. And the benefits of applying the principles of human performance, well, I won't go through them anymore. I've spoke about them. They're in this booklet. Please take the time to have a look at them. I'd like to finish with another quotation. And it's from the Piper Alpha inquiry. And the Piper Alpha is something that's embedded in our memory, and it's something that we will always learn from. And every number of years, there is a revitalization of the events that occurred to make people remember those who perished. And it is this, that safety is not an intellectual exercise to keep us in work. It is a matter of life and death. It is the sum of our contribution to safety management that will determine whether the people we work with live or die. And that's from Sir Brian Appleton, the technical advisor for the Piper Alpha inquiry. And here ends my presentation. Thank you very much.